You park in the spot that was never yours to park in, and nobody stops you, because the man who used to own that spot doesn't know you're the one who owns it now. 14 months ago, you carried a cardboard box of desk plants out of this building while he held the door open for someone else's exit, not yours. The box had a crack in one corner and a small ceramic pot rattled inside it the whole walk to your car, and you remember thinking that was the most humiliating sound you'd ever heard. Louder, somehow, than anything anyone had actually said to you that day. Today you're back, and he walked past you 20 minutes ago and didn't blink. Same face. Same voice, low and clipped. The same way he used to end meetings before anyone had finished their point. He just doesn't recognize the man he fired, because the man he fired never wore a jacket like this, never stood like this, never had a reason to look him in the eye like this. Here's the part that should bother you. You didn't buy this building for the cap rate. You bought it because his company still had 31 months left on the lease. 9 months before any of this, you were standing in a gas station under fluorescent light, buying a $5 scratch ticket because the coffee line was too long, and the rack was right there. You'd bought maybe a dozen tickets in your whole life. The clerk didn't even look up from his phone when he scanned it. The number underneath the coding said $4,300,000, and for a full 10 seconds you stood in the parking lot convinced you'd misread a decimal point. Nobody warns you that the number on the ticket is never the number you actually get. Your accountant, a sharp woman named Priya Nakamura who worked out of a strip mall office with a desk the size of a kitchen table, walked you through the real math. The cash option was $2,600,000, because annuities always pay more than lump sums, and lump sums are always the honest number. The state took its share. The lottery commission withheld 24% automatically, which isn't your real tax bracket. At this income, you'd owe closer to 37% the following spring, which meant another $300,000 had to sit untouched, waiting for a bill that hadn't arrived yet. Net, real, spendable, $1,610,000. You didn't buy a boat. You didn't buy a house with a pool. You sat with that number for 6 weeks and let it turn into something quieter than money. It became a plan, the way a bruise becomes a scar, slowly and without asking your permission. You kept living in the one bedroom with the leaky radiator. You kept answering recruiter calls offering $12 an hour less than you used to make, before Grant Whitlow sat you down in conference room B and read a script about market realignments off a printed sheet he barely glanced up from. You said thank you. You hung up. Every rejection felt different now, not like a door closing, but like weight shifting from one foot to the other, while you waited for something underneath you to harden. Then the listing came up under a name that meant nothing to you. Class B office building. 41,000 square feet, single tenant, cap rate 7.1%. You almost scrolled past it. You didn't. You clicked the tenant disclosure, the document nobody reads except the person whose whole future depends on it. And there it was in a table nobody dramatizes. Meridian Logistics Group. Lease signed the year you remembered clearly, because you were in that conference room the day they signed it. You called Priya. You let her think it was just a good deal, which, technically, it also was. Purchase price $2,150,000. Your cash injection $850,000 straight out of the lottery account, more than half of what you had left after taxes. A commercial mortgage for the rest, $1,300,000 at 6.4%, 25 years, $8,590 a month. Rental income already locked at $19,200 a month. Stay with that number for a second, because it matters later. That's the check that used to land in someone else's account, about to start landing in yours. A good deal is still a good deal even when it's also revenge. You told yourself that on repeat until it started sounding like business instead of a grudge. You said it in the shower, you said it in traffic. Eventually you stopped needing to say it out loud at all, which worried you more than the saying ever had. You spent your nights reading commercial real estate law instead of sleeping, master leases, tenant improvements, estoppel certificates, until the language felt as familiar as your old employee login. You weren't playing a game. You were building an iron box, and every clause was a bolt you tightened yourself. At the closing table, nobody in the room recognized you because 14 Oak Holdings LLC is a name, not a face, and you made sure of that on purpose. The previous owner, an old man named Harold Feld who'd held the property 18 years, shook your hand and said he hoped you'd take care of it. You told him you would. That part wasn't an act. Ownership transferred on a Tuesday in March. The rent that used to land in Harold Feld's account now landed in yours, $19,200 automatically. A company called Meridian Logistics Group paying a man they'd never met, with a name they'd never heard. You kept the property manager, Denise Ruiz, who'd run the building for 6 years and fixed the elevator before anyone finished complaining about it. You told her the new ownership wanted to stay hands-off. That was a lie of omission, wearing a management style as a disguise. That first month, when the payment landed, you stared at the number longer than you'd like to admit. It wasn't the money. It was whose money it used to be, and whose it was now. 8 months later, you're back inside for the first time since the cardboard box. Same smell. Burnt coffee, carpet cleaner. Some things don't change even when everything underneath them has. You're wearing a jacket you never wore to this office. Dark wool, tailored, expensive enough to shift your outline just past the edge of casual recognition. Grant Whitlow walks by near the vending machines, holding a stack of blue folders, thumb resting over a performance review grid you know by heart. His eyes track past your shoulder, toward the break room door. He doesn't see the employee he called not a long-term culture fit. He sees an inspector, a consultant. Furniture with a different coat on. You give him a nod. It's the cheapest thing you own. Tasha almost catches you. She's carrying a coffee mug you gave her 3 Christmases ago, and for one full second her eyes start to track toward you, before Denise points at a stained ceiling tile and the moment passes. You notice things now you never noticed as an employee. The thermostat set 2 degrees too warm because it's cheaper to run that way. The parking line's fading, which will need repainting next spring, at your expense now. The boring kind of ownership nobody puts in a headline. You walk past the server room and hear the same low hum that used to vibrate through the wall behind your old cubicle. You know now why the ceiling grid above desk 4 was always slightly crooked. A structural shift from years back that the old owner patched instead of fixing properly. You own that patch now. You own the crooked ceiling. You own the silence between the wall studs. Here's the cost that never shows up on a listing. You have to keep pretending you're nobody, in a building where you used to be somebody, every single time you walk through the door. 11 months after closing, Grant Whitlow's lease comes up for renewal, and this is the moment the whole quiet plan finally has a decision inside it. You could raise the rent 40%. The market would technically support it. You could let the lease lapse entirely and force an entire company to relocate on your say-so, the same way one email once forced you to relocate your whole life. You have the leverage. You've had it, quietly, for almost a year. You can picture it exactly. The certified letter. The panic in executive meetings. The scramble for square footage in a tight market. Whitlow sweating through his shirt trying to explain to corporate why operations halted for 3 weeks. You could do it with one signature from your couch, in sweatpants, without ever raising your voice. You sit down with Priya and finally tell her the part you left out from the beginning, that the tenant is the man who fired you, that this was never just a cap rate, that the whole architecture of the deal was built around a grudge dressed up as a spreadsheet. She doesn't flinch. She's an accountant. She's heard stranger things across that kitchen table-sized desk than a man buying a building to get close to the person who fired him. What she tells you instead is that revenge has a return on investment too, and it's almost always worse than the interest rate on your mortgage. If you evict them, she says, pulling a legal pad toward her and starting to write numbers as she talks, the way she always does. You lose a tenant with 2 years of flawless payment history. You spend $60,000 in broker fees finding a replacement, because Class B office isn't leasing itself right now. You eat 3 months of vacancy loss on $19,200 a month, which is another $57,000 gone before anyone signs anything. You pay for improvements to suit a new lease, easily another $20,000-$25,000 depending on what they want. You'll burn around $110,000 in liquidity just to watch one man carry a box to his car. You've already carried a box out of that building once. Do you really want to pay 6 figures to watch him carry his? And then you think about Tasha. 3 desks down from where yours used to be, still there, still doing the same careful, competent work she always did. Needing this job the way you needed it, the way anyone with a mortgage or a kid's tuition or an aging parent needs a job. If the lease collapses, the company downsizes fast to absorb the relocation cost, and she's exactly where you were 14 months ago. Middle tier, replaceable, first on the list when someone upstairs starts drawing lines through names. Your revenge wouldn't just land on Whitlow. It would land on the people who used to share their lunch with you when you forgot yours, who covered your shifts, who never once made you feel like a line item. A landlord's silence is not the same as a landlord's mercy. But from where the tenant is standing, you can't always tell the difference, and maybe that's the closest thing to justice you're going to get, without hurting people who never hurt you. Here's the part nobody puts in the thumbnail. Winning is lonely, when the entire point of winning was that no one could know you'd won. There's no one to call. There's no room full of people to watch your face when the news breaks. The whole architecture only works if it stays invisible, which means the moment you'd most want witnessed is the one moment guaranteed to have no witnesses at all. You haven't told your mother the real size of the account, just that you got a consulting gig good enough to fix her brakes and cover her dental work, a lie small enough that it barely registers as a lie, the kind you tell to protect someone rather than deceive them. You haven't told anyone outside of Tasha and Priya that you own a commercial building, let alone which one. At a barbecue in June, someone asks what you've been up to, and you say, "A little real estate," and the sentence sits so far beneath the truth that saying it out loud feels like lying, even though every word is technically accurate, and you spend the rest of the party watching people talk about their raises and their vacations like you're watching a movie you're not actually in. You renew Grant Whitlow's lease. You don't raise the rent 40%, you raise it 4%, the standard annual escalation already written into the original lease. The same number Harold Feld would have charged if he'd stayed. The number that has nothing to do with him, and everything to do with a clause drafted years before either of you mattered to this building. You tell yourself this is the mature choice. Some nights you believe it. Some nights you lie awake wondering if mercy and cowardice look exactly the same from the outside, and whether anyone, including you, could actually tell them apart. You sign the renewal at your kitchen table while rain hits the window. The same window that used to rattle above the leaky radiator in the old apartment. Except now the radiator works and the window doesn't rattle, and somehow you miss the rattling a little. No fanfare. No confrontation in a carpeted office. Just a paragraph. Extended 36 months, and a confirmation checkmark on your screen, closing a chapter that no one else even knew had opened. 3 years after the gas station, you're parked in that same spot again. The sign's been repainted, reserved owner, and underneath, in smaller letters Denise insisted on adding because she thought it was funny, 3 initials that mean nothing to anyone who walks past them, initials that only you and Priya and Tasha have ever bothered to decode. Grant Whitlow retired in the spring. A sheet cake in the same break room Tasha almost caught you in, a card everyone signed, a gift card to a steakhouse nobody thought hard about. You didn't go, obviously. You read about it in Denise's monthly report, 1 line among 12, next to a note about the elevator contract and a reminder to reseal the parking lot before winter. He walked out the front doors into a retirement funded, in part, by the efficiency scores he hit the year he fired you, a fact you find almost funny now, in the distant way old wounds become funny once they've mostly closed. Tasha's still here, promoted twice since, with a new title and a corner desk and, she tells you, actual authority over a budget for once. Last month you finally told her everything over dinner at a diner 3 towns over, somewhere neither of you had ever been, somewhere with no history attached to it. The ticket, the number, the building, the parking spot, all of it. In order, the way you'd rehearsed it 100 times in your head and never once said out loud. She went quiet for a long moment, staring at her fries, turning one over with her fork like she needed something to do with her hands, and then said the only thing that actually mattered, that she wished you'd told her sooner. Not because she needed the money, because she'd missed carrying it with you. You lived in that building like a ghost for 2 years, she said, not unkindly, just plainly, the way she says most things. You bought the walls just so you wouldn't feel like you got kicked out of the room. She wasn't wrong. The money hadn't bought freedom first, it had bought an anchor, tying you to the exact address of your deepest embarrassment, keeping you orbiting it like a satellite trapped in the gravity of an old injury, circling the one place you most wanted to prove you'd outgrown. You still keep the closing documents in a drawer at home, 14 Oak Holdings printed where your name should be, next to a folder of old rejection emails you never got around to deleting. The building's worth more now, $2,890,000 on the last appraisal. The mortgage down to $1,140,000. 4 tenants on the rent roll instead of 1, because you finally let Denise lease out the second floor once Whitlow's footprint shrank, and the space sat empty for a quarter. You didn't love watching go by. You read quarterly market reports over breakfast now, the way other people read the sports page. You know vacancy rates down to the decimal for 3 zip codes you didn't know existed 4 years ago. You know which contractors overcharge for roof work and which ones actually clean up after themselves, which tenants pay early out of habit, and which ones you'll need to call every single month for the rest of their lease. The anger that built this whole thing has slowly burned off its toxicity, leaving behind something harder and more useful, an actual skill, a genuine competence you didn't have and now can't unlearn. You sit in spot 14 for a minute before going inside. Not because you need to, because some quiet part of you still can't believe you're allowed to. So here's the question worth sitting with. If you had the leverage to make the man who fired you disappear with 1 signature, would you have used it? Or is staying quiet, staying in control, its own kind of winning?